workshop today we're going to be looking at junipers. Now junipers are a very widespread species of tree around the world. They grow from the frozen north right the way down to the frozen south and right up to the equator. They grow at extreme altitude, they grow at sea level, they grow in damp situations, they grow in very dry situations, and they're extremely common in bonsai. But what I want to do today is look specifically at what we might term soft foliage junipers. This one here that I've been working on, this is, I'm told, Blores. It appears that it may well be. That's a very common species or variety in the UK. We've got Japanese Itoigara, which again, very fine, soft foliage, probably one of the best varieties of juniper for bonsai. But the other variety of juniper that we have is sort of a needle juniper, needle foliage variety. This one is a Japanese variety, but there are lots of different types of junipers. So if your juniper has this spiky type of foliage, that's not what we're looking at today. As with a lot of things, junipers don't grow particularly well in my garden. Where I live, it tends to be by the coast, it tends to be quite cool, and when it does get warm, it tends to be really dry. And most junipers, particularly Japanese varieties, and especially these soft foliage varieties, seem to like warm, humid conditions. Not something that I can provide readily. Although with the use of a greenhouse, obviously we can pull a few strings and make a few things happen. In general, these are a very slow growing type of juniper. Certainly in my garden, this here Itoigara again, that little shoot there, that was last year's growth. So you can see they're not really doing a lot, but they grow every year without fail, and what we need to do is find techniques that we can use to maximize that growth every year and keep these trees moving forward. And to that end, I bought this example. This has come from a collection of a lovely old gentleman I met in the north of Scotland, and he began cultivating this as bonsai back in the early 90s, so probably 40 odd years ago, a little bit less, a little bit more, I don't know. But this has been done in quite an unusual way for junipers. You've seen me and you've seen a lot of other people take a juniper, clean it out, wire it out to the tips, place it all, and just almost instantly it looks like bonsai. But the key to that is it looks like bonsai. If we take the wire off, it reverts back to its natural unwired state. This little tree here is a Spanish Sabina that I bought in a few years ago and sold it to somebody, and then later on I bought it back. Now at some point when I sold this tree, it was nice and tight and compact, and it didn't have any styling to it, but it had nice compact foliage. And now all of a sudden you look at it and the foliage is all over the place. Now what's happened here, somebody's cleaned this all out. They've gone to the ends, they've taken each little pom-pom of foliage on the end, wired the tree and styled it to some degree, and then for some strange reason taken the wire off it before any of the growth is really fixed in place. And so now we've got this sorry looking specimen which has barely got enough foliage to photosynthesize the energy it needs. And it seems to me that this is not the best way to be working junipers, especially in a climate where they tend not to grow very well. And so as we go through this example here today, I'm going to show you how we can avoid ending up with a juniper like this. And I know a lot of junipers end up like this because we buy collections, and I've got quite a few here at the moment. So it's a good example really of how the way that we tend to work these junipers is not particularly beneficial, like I say, especially in an area where they grow very slowly. When I started bonsai, there was no internet, so the only way that we could find out how to do anything basically was reading books, because there weren't even any magazines. And somebody years and years ago published a picture. I don't know who it was, but you may have seen it. It was regarding the pruning of juniper foliage, and the picture was somewhat like this. So we had a little shoot like that, and whoever it was explaining that basically in order to prune a juniper, we go over it and we take the tips away like so, and that will then nip out the bigger ones, And that then gives us these nice little balls of foliage, and that's how we prune a juniper, and that's how we keep it nice and compact. Now, that's exactly what's happened with this tree over here. Somebody has just pinched the ends just like this, year after year after year, for probably the last 25, maybe 30 years. And as you can see, it's produced some really dense foliage. Now, that pinching technique I just demonstrated was always passed off as being the best way to prune junipers, because you can't scissor prune juniper, because if you do, you get brown ends. But you can see here where this tree has been pinched, you can see lots of brown ends, and you can also see the new growth coming through. So obviously we do get some brown ends, but less so than if we were to scissor prune. And this constant pinching and pinching, as you can see, has created some incredibly dense, solid, thick foliage. And on the face of it, that's exactly what we want, and so the technique has worked to some degree. But the issue with this technique is, in the very long term, by which I mean 20, 30 years, is that what it tends to do is produce growth on the ends. So where we pinch the ends, we tend to get growth on the ends. And if I just open that up now, you can see we've got some quite long branches here, and then the foliage only comes right on the very ends. And here you can see this particular shoot here, that's got some considerable length to it, and by the density of the buds here, you can see there's a lot more going on here than there is down here. So over a period of decades, what we end up with is a situation like you can see here, very long branches with just the foliage on the end. And you can see here the foliage on the end exposed to sunlight is very nice, thick, dense and strong, and underneath here it's much weaker. So going back to this scruffy little thing, junipers don't back bud in the way that a lot of trees do. So if we were to take a branch, typically if this were a deciduous tree, we could cut this anywhere we wanted, and assuming that tree had reasonable vigour, it would back bud. But a juniper won't do that. So if we cut all the green off the branch, it won't produce any new buds. And junipers make new buds amongst the green foliage. So where we've got here, we've got these stronger tips, and then we've got smaller stuff in the back, and so this can produce more and more budding in this position. So if we were to just pinch this like I just showed you, progressively this little area here would get bigger and thicker, and there would be more of it, but it would still be on the end of this long branch. Junipers produce buds or back buds or adventitious buds from forks in their branches. So if we look here, hopefully you can just about see that sprightly little bright green thick shoot, and hopefully you can see that comes from a fork in between these two twigs. Now that's how juniper produces its back buds. So coming up to this one here, we can see here where all these branches fork right deep inside the crown of this tree, those are back buds. But as you can see, in comparison with this, they're quite sparse and they're quite thin. And the reason for that is because this upper foliage is so dense, there's no light getting in there. So that's what we've got to try and address, because ultimately, and there's lots more in here you can see, which is how we know we've got a healthy tree, because even in spite of not having been pruned for a long time, it is producing back buds. But if we don't get the light into these, they will eventually just give up. They'll dry out, brown off and be gone, like so much of what's laying on the floor next to me at the moment. So we need to address this. Here's a great example. Look, here's a little back bud here, but then we've got 4 or 5 inches of bare branches, and then all the foliage is out here at the ends. So the pinching technique I show you works perfectly well, and it's brought us to this stage. It may have taken a few years, but it's certainly produced some impressive foliage. But long term, we can't continue to do that. I've seen these trees after 50 years, and the foliage is 30 centimeters away from the main branches even, and they just get longer and longer and longer. So what I'm doing here is pruning this tree to address that, and it's also putting some style into the tree because the pinching has produced the nice dense foliage, and it's produced masses of fine branches, all of which are nice and self-supporting. So you can see here we're beginning to get a reasonable style to this tree without any wire at all. So first task with this tree is to get inside and get rid of all this dead material. Hopefully you can see there's lots of little dead twigs here, and over the years they've tried to grow, but they've been shaded out and gradually they just dry out and die away. So you can see we've got some which are bigger, small stuff. So also old foliage from a year or two ago, we want to get rid of all of that and make nice clean cuts, nice and close to the branches. We don't need to be leaving any stubs, and then the small stuff we can just pull away. So we're working right from the base of the branches all the way out to the ends, and removing everything within there that's not alive. Having pruned all the dead material away from this tree, the second stage is to remove all the weak foliage. Now this is best done in the early summer, late spring, early summer, and hopefully you can see here some of this is starting to go quite yellow. What we want to do is take those shoots. You see, if I lay that alongside a nice green shoot, you can see it's already gone yellow. So what we want to do is take each individual little branch. Hopefully you can see here we've got one little branch, and the inner shoots are very weak, discoloured, almost no buds at all, very little going on there. So what we want to do is pick out all those yellow and discoloured shoots, right, just with tweezers. You don't need to use scissors for this. Take away all those bits that are being shaded out, because by the end of the summer they will have all gone brown anyway. And so we just go through that, clean that like that. Here we've got one or two that are quite weak, not doing very much, but hopefully you can see a nice dense and strong on the end, but a little bit thin and sparse lower down. But for the sake of clarity, let me just show you what I'm doing here with this discombobulated juniper shoot. You can see here we've got the weaker parts that are going yellow, as I said. So what we do is remove those, much like that, but without pulling all the bark off, of course. And then you can see here we've got some very strong foliage on the end, and overall we've got the shape of, I don't know, a little Christmas tree here. And you can see there's a central rib that runs all the way up along that. And then when we prune, let me just get rid of some of this so you can see. Where we prune, we want to get in amongst there, and we just slide the scissors down to where we've got two nice little side shoots, and then we can just prune and remove that piece. And so hopefully you can just about make out here, this is where I've cut. We've got a nice strong one here, and then we've got a nice strong one here. And if we flip that over, we've also got a strong piece here and a strong piece there. And again, at a subdivision, you'll find that that goes along and that forks as well. So what we want to do is take the middle out of those stronger areas too. But what we're not doing is just scissor pruning over the top, because that's just going to ruin the foliage. So we always put the scissors in, slide them down to two little side branches, take that little tip out, and now hopefully you can see that's a nice and balanced little piece of foliage, which is going to, as you can see, it lets already, you can see from the paper underneath, it lets the light through, and so that's all we need to do. So in order to prune this tree, we need to obviously identify what's strong and what's weak, and we do that by getting inside, gently putting our fingers in there and finding these individual branch lines. So here you can see one coming up, and we've got this big strong piece on the top, but beneath it we've got this piece here which has got about half as many buds. So what we want to do to balance this is to reduce the density of the strong area here, and we do that by basically looking at that line and following it along, and hopefully you can see there you've got this herringbone structure of buds on each side. Now what we want to do is take out a middle piece like that, and that leaves one or two side branches on there. I'm sorry if you can't see this very well. That leaves us in this case with 3 side branches, but still too much density. So again, we can subdivide that. So we go in, prune to a position where there are 2 good shoots on each side, so 1 becomes 2, and there's your little strong piece that's come out. And because we've got 3 little twigs on this one, we can take the middle out of that one, and we can take the middle out of that one, and then you can see there overall that's fairly balanced. Now what we've done here is gone inside and pruned, which gives us a different result to if we were to just do that pinching that I showed you earlier, because if we pinch here it grows here, whereas if we prune down in here it'll grow down in there. And because we've lightened this significantly, you see if you compare the two there, one very dense, one looking much more sparse, obviously that's going to let the light in, that's going to favour the back buds that come up in the forks of the branches, and so it's going to help this tree to remain compact and not just get leggy and get away from us, as the example I showed you earlier. Part of the task with this pruning is to balance the vigour of a tree. It's something that I'm forever going on about, but I don't see it very often when I'm out there in the bonsai world. You tend to find trees that get weak areas and stronger areas, and that's all to do with the way that the trees are pruned and cultivated. Now obviously all trees need sunlight to grow, and the more sunlight they get, typically the better they grow, and the more compact and tighter that they tend to become. Because if the light intensity is very bright, the tree doesn't need to make big leaves or big extravagant amounts of foliage, because it can get what it needs right here. And what we want to do with this pruning is make these little solar panels as efficient as they can be. Now obviously with a tree like this that's got some height, we don't treat this part the same as we do this part. Because trees are apically dominant, they grow strongest at the top, they also grow strongest at the ends, but the lower parts and the inner parts tend not to grow so well, and that's what this pruning is all about, to balance this up. So this piece here I've already done and more or less finished, but this piece up here I haven't done anything with at all yet other than cleaned out the old dead material. But we can prune harder up here because the new growth will come thicker and faster at this point than it will here. But if we don't balance that vigour, eventually these lower branches become weaker and weaker, and progressively they get longer and leggier. We keep wiring them, but then they're not going to be safe, so eventually they're going to be lost, and we're going to end up having to try and turn this into something that it's not. But thankfully, because of the good husbandry this tree has received over the years, it's all fairly nice and compact, and I've caught it just in time to be able to really take this tree forwards and protect its future, rather than allowing it to just get longer and weaker. So what I'm now going to start doing is going through all of this and cleaning this out and pruning this back. But as I say, because this upper part of the tree is so much denser and stronger than this lower part, we can be a little more vigorous with this than we would with this. And ultimately, if the branch is very weak, in a situation like with the little tree I showed you that had previously been wired, that tree is so weak and it has so little foliage, it's barely got what it needs to be able to grow and to function. So that tree, in order to rescue that, to save that, we're going to cultivate that carefully and properly and leave it just to do its thing, because foliage makes energy, energy makes foliage. And so what we need to do with evergreens is produce more foliage to get more growth that we can then use, and the more growth you get, the more energy you get, so the more growth you get, so it snowballs. So in the early days of restoring a weak tree, it can go 2, 3, 4 years and you see no real progress at all, but it's building. And because these trees do grow slowly, it tends to build little by little, and as each year goes by, if everything being equal and you're cultivating it properly and doing all the right things, the tree will gradually improve. That's always helpful to keep pictures of those things, and then at least you can see your own progress. Now finished thinning this branch, and you can see now it's all nice and even. We've left a little more foliage on the end here than in the middle part here. Also there's some growth in the back, and most of that has been left as well. So now what I want to do is start to put some shape into this, because as you can see we've just got a big blob. Now because we're not going to be wiring this tree, we're basically going to be doing this by some very careful pruning. Because the branches here are relatively thick, and you can see they're obviously of sufficient caliper to hold this up, whatever you do with it, it just springs back. So what we're going to do is basically just go along this and clean the underside. So all these little scruffy little tiny pieces that are hanging down, we're going to take all those away, and that's going to give us a nice finish to the underside of the branch, and it's all going to expose some of this ramification. Now, as you work through this, sometimes you'll get a little guy like this one, and he's sort of flopping around and actually sort of trying to come out from underneath. But what we can do is, being a bit of a crafty comber, we can bring this all up. You just run your fingers through it and just face it all upwards and give it a gentle brush, and then in its resting position we then can take away all the little tiny pieces that are growing downwards or going in a direction that we don't want. And again, we're pruning those back at those little forks like I showed you earlier, and we're favouring everything that's pointing upwards towards the light. And so you can see there, hopefully that gives you a nice clean line underneath there. As I obtained this tree, it was basically 2 trunks, 1 crown. But with this pruning, what we're going to be able to do is separate off those 2 crowns and give this a much more natural appearance. So you can see I've done the one on the left. We're starting to get that a little bit separated out from the one on the right, and you can see this great big ball of foliage here. That now needs my attention. And what I'll be doing with this is actually pruning this from underneath upwards, rather than pruning it as I did on this one from the top downwards to shorten it. So we've managed to shorten this one, but we want to try and keep the weight, or the height on this should I say, but the weight of it, you can see there's much too much of it. It's much too heavy and it really sticks out like a sore thumb now. So that's the last piece of this puzzle to put in place.